So let's sort of bring some context back to this, because the Big Ten and the SEC athletic directors are going to be meeting this week on Wednesday to basically discuss how they're going to guide this. Because when the new, and again, this is not about the 2025 season, this is about the new college football playoff contract, which runs from the 2026 season through the 2031 season. The SEC and the Big Ten have decision-making power. Now, there's some flowery language in there where they are saying, oh, yeah, of course, we are going to have robust internal discussions with the other, 10, 11, all of the commissioners, all of the presidents, everybody who makes up all these different committees. But the SEC and the Big Ten, by the contract, have the power to be able to set things in motion. So that's why the meetings this week, in addition to some college football playoff management committee meetings scheduled for February the 25th, that's what has everybody looking at this. Now, the ACC met last week. The Big 12 is meeting this week. Everybody is getting their ducks in a row for what will be the negotiations. Now, as we've discussed earlier, 14-team models, 16-team models, both seem likely. The idea of automatic qualifiers do seem like they are likely going to be at the top of the competition, at the top of the conversation. But there's some other pieces to this. Like you mentioned earlier, the changes to conference championship weekend, the fact that this could finally get the SEC to move to a 9-game schedule is another piece of this that is going to be interesting, as well as a scheduling arrangement between the Big Ten and the SEC. So as we start to look at all the different angles to this, Tom, I know you either have just turned in or are working on a piece for CBSSports.com. Where do you feel the strongest about how we're plowing ahead with the college football playoff?
I mean, the horse is out of the barn. We've known this was coming ever since the Big Ten and the SEC were able to wrangle control of the playoff away. We knew that this was going to be the ultimate endpoint. So I'm not going to harp on the same crap I'm always harping on about this. Like, I'm never going to like it. But there are aspects to this that I genuinely appreciate. Like, there was last week the quote, and this is from Dellinger's story, a quote from Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, saying, there needs to be fairness and access to the championship. It needs to be a true championship, not artificial and not an invitational. Jim, I have news for you. The format we've been playing for the last whatever years has been an invitational. It has never.
Isn't that a shot at the 4-team relic, like the last year, the 4-team when FSU didn't get in?
Yes, but it's also a relic of the 12-teamer because it's an invitational. It's
sure.
When 2/3 of the field is an at-large and it's based on rankings, it's not really you're not playing your way in for directly, literally. What I appreciate about the new format is at least everybody knows the guidelines now. Like the word playoff is actually more accurate of a description of what it is, because even if it's an unbalanced thing where the Big Ten and the SEC get 4 autos and the Big 12 and the ACC only get 2, going into the year, everybody knows what you have to do. And I think that is what a playoff is, because if you look at playoffs in the professional sports, they're not choosing one team out of a field of 4 for a final playoff wildcard spot. The team has to earn the spot based on the rules, based on how things are set up. So from that aspect, I'm okay with it. Never going to be happy with it, but I prefer it other than to a committee of people choosing teams. I always will. The other part of this that I actually enjoy and actually kind of made me happy, it's like, it's not how I wanted to get there, but I'll gladly take it. 9 conference games in the SEC. I have long been a proponent of more conference games because I think now, especially as these leagues grow, we, as Norlander touched on, we're losing the fabric of what brought a lot of people to college athletics. And the more that these leagues grow and the less often you see the teams that you're used to playing, you kind of lose touch with it. So I think if you expand conference schedules, like Illinois, part of the thing when expansion this year was we no longer play Iowa every year. We no longer play Wisconsin every year. Like 2 states that literally border us that we have been playing forever. We're going to see them every other year for the most part now. And that sucks to me. Now, if you add, like when you add conference games, you can decrease that, especially in the SEC where you've now grown to 16. So you're not as bloated as the Big Ten at 18. But still, if you're playing 9 games, more of your traditional rivals you will see, while you will sprinkle in some of the new guys. And then those rivalries will develop over time. But I also love the idea of the quote unquote Big Ten SEC challenge. in which the two leagues will then schedule a non-conference game against each other. And I guess maybe they'll do it like in, based on where you finished the previous season, like 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2, to generate or at least increase the odds of getting great TV matchups, which is what it's all about, because they're trying to increase television revenue. Because now in the era of revenue sharing, when you're going to have to be splitting all this money with the players, well, shit, we got to keep some of our piles, so we have to expand that pile. And this is a good way for fans just during the regular season. It's creating more excellent regular season matchups to watch every single Saturday for fans. And that's ultimately what everybody wants. I think that maybe you can try to come up with a model where if you're doing a 12-game regular season, everybody plays 9 conference games. There's 4 power leagues. Now, this will go against part of, giving the G5 one spot, and they will fight as like hell against it. But I think that eventually you're just screaming at the tide to go back out. What if the SEC schedules 1 non-conference against the Big Ten, 1 against the ACC, 1 against the Big 12? All 4 of the power leagues schedule 1 non-conference game against each other. So that's 3 non-conference games, and everybody plays 9 conference games. There's your 12-game season.
It's an NFL.
Yeah. Now, I get it. The size of the leagues, you can't do it for everybody because the leagues are all different sizes. But I think you should try to work your way towards that model. And then, like, Notre Dame could be considered an ACC opponent.
Now, coaches do like playing that G5.
They do. But now that the playoff is different, where it's going to be your top 4 teams get in, you can afford to lose a non-conference game. It doesn't really hurt you that much.
But it's also for like it's nice to have a game where your backups are going to be in.
So play a G5 team for your spring game, except it's no longer played in the spring. It's played in early August.
I don't know if they would do that, but I think, look, Tom's point about TV is really good. You also need good home matchups.
Mm-hmm.
TVs are getting bigger and cheaper and nicer, and the home experience is better. Like, you have to have experiences in the stadium that you really can't replicate at home. And one of those experiences, I think, is like the true energy of a big game, like somebody you're actually excited to go see, like, 'cause it has real juice to it. I think the Big Ten SEC would give you that. Big Ten, the ACC would maybe like the top third of the ACC would get fans excited. I don't think many people care about seeing the bottom half of the ACC. It's sort of like the casual fans. How do you get your stadium to go from 75 to 100, right? I don't think much of the Big 12 moves the needle at all for SEC fans, maybe a little bit for Big Ten fans. And so I think if you had all 4 of those play each other, I think you'd have a good number of the teams in the SEC and the Big Ten be kind of disappointed. Like, not really, like, cool. Texas coming to town. They ain't doing it for me if I'm a Tennessee fan.
I'll tell you what, I am really happy with the way that some of these universities have responded to create these matchups on campus already, sort of without the force. I mean, I know this is a little bit of a side conversation from where we're at, but like, I just assumed Clemson LSU was going to be in Atlanta. It's not. It's going to be in Death Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And like, we know that Texas and Ohio State is going to be in the shoe. There are just, and we had the Texas Michigan game this past year. I mean, Alabama is going to be at Florida State. I mean, that is a kickoff ass game if I've ever seen one. I mean, that thing is supposed to be in a neutral site, NFL thing, but it's not. It's going to be in Tallahassee, and those kinds of environments are cool. So I do agree that if one thing that comes out of this means better on-campus non-conference games, that's a great thing to be able to come out of any sort of step forward into college football's future.
Do we know, going back to like the non-conference idea, the top with the SEC and the Big Ten, the top 4 teams get in? Will that be based on conference standings or rankings?
That's what Norlander asked. It's a really interesting question, because if we harken back to the Big 12 when they had the whole Oklahoma, Texas Tech thing, and then also again the Big 12 when they had Baylor TCU in 2014.
14.
Yeah, like leading up to the conference is certainly interesting. I think you probably should leave it up to the conference because you want to take away power of the committee.
Well, what about just this past year? They had 4 teams tied for first place in the Big 12.
Right.
I mean, they, ended up picking 2 based on their tiebreakers, and they went and they played for the one spot that was available to them in the college football playoff. Would then both of those teams just go? And then if that's the case, why do you even play that game?
That's a good point. I don't hate this at all, by the way. Like, it just doesn't seem. I don't see how this is materially worse than the 12. But I could certainly be missing something.
I don't think it's worse than the 12. I just think it's, like I said, I think I appreciate more that there's actual guidelines for getting in, which is
as
all.
opposed to just being like the field goal posts are always moving all along the way. Because so I guess that would be my biggest thing that I would want answered. Biggest thing that I would need to figure out would be the idea that if the selection committee is still going to exist, is it their ranking that will determine, these other extra bids for conferences, or are the conferences in charge of it? Are they each going to have their own method of being able to choose it? No, those are all very, I mean, that's why they're going to have these meetings. That's why they're going to have all these discussions here in the next coming weeks. But according to Yahoo Sports' Ross Dellinger, the expectation is that there could be final decisions made in the coming weeks.
Have you guys thought about 12-16 or 14-16 much?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I like 14 better.
Why?
Buys.
Yeah, I think it preserves the importance of actually playing for something in your conference. Like, getting the bye is a big deal. I know what happened this year in the playoff, but like I think the math will prove that out, especially if the talent in the sport continues to kind of spread out more.
Good call.